All right, good afternoon. My name is Angela Mastrovito. I'm with Rebecca's Legacy Justice for Rebecca. And today's episode is going to take us down a different path. Rebecca's story is one that included domestic violence, but she is not here to tell her own story. So we have with us today a survivor of domestic violence that after many years of silence is ready to share her own story. Our survivor is identified by a first name only to protect those who are still working through their life's journey related to the domestic violence. Our episode today is only audio as well. I hope and pray that you will not only be drawn in by this personal narrative of survival, but that this testimony will encourage you and give you hope to follow your path. There may be descriptions and language that may be triggering. If you are in need of mental health services, please contact your local agency or dial 988. If you need help with domestic violence, text 88788 or call 800-799-7233. Without further ado, we will start the narrative to Paula's testimony of survival.
What's happening? I don't understand. Oh, my head was spinning. We had just said our vows. Is this it? What did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong. Here I was on our honeymoon, dismissed, shamed for wanting to be intimate with my new husband. So it began. The yelling, the swearing, the shaming, the mind games. I learned ever so quickly to never express my feelings, wishes, desires, if they were not in line with his. There is a saying by Maya Angelou that states, "When people show you who they are the first time, believe them. Oh, believe them." I ought to have run for the hills right then and there. But as a good Christian woman who had gone through premarital counseling, had known the man for years, and knew he too was a good Christian, surely I must have done something wrong. He loves me. He would never hurt me. He's my knight in shining armor. What did I do? I waited 20 years for this man, for this moment. What had I gotten wrong? I would ask these questions for decades, through so much abuse, and to be fair, we were fire and ice. I could see that very clearly now, 20 years later. I came from a home where I was neglected. Not my physical needs, but my emotional and psychological needs were not of any concern for my family. Were it not for my grandmother, I easily could have perished from lack of affection and engagement. I was rejected by my father upon my birth when he learned that I was a girl. That was not to his satisfaction, and so he left the hospital immediately. That was it. Didn't even want to hold me. It had begun. A little girl trying to get her daddy to pay attention to her, to love her. The pattern was being set for a marriage that would come 20 years later. I would spend my childhood being shut down, beat, ignored, shamed, and simply never good enough. The template for what I would eventually recognize as a favorable mate was set for me, right there and then. And for that matter, my older sister as well. Emotionally unavailable men, and yet, while dating, he doted on me. He cherished me. He love-bombed me for years. Flowers, fancy gifts, poems, love letters, all of it. How did a ceremony on one day change everything? Change me and who I was inherently? To say I was tortured in my own mind is an understatement. The confusion and anxiety were off the charts. I had to be on medications just to get through most mundane tasks because I never knew what would trigger him and make him blow up. An author by the name of Dr. Harville Hendricks wrote in his book, Getting the Love You Want, says, and I'm paraphrasing, that we are attracted, even unconsciously, to partners who have similar traits, both positive and negative, to our caregivers growing up. And we choose them in hopes to heal unresolved issues from childhood in our marriage. Even the words partner and parent have the same letters. Well, I most certainly found the exact replica of my father in my husband. They even eventually turned out to look almost identical. People used to mistake them for brothers. How scary is that? I put all of my strength into doing everything I could to make this man love me, unlike my father. And I could get the love that I longed for all my life. But with the fear of abandonment, I clung more deeply onto my husband, only making him recoil and lash out even more. With every shunning and emotional smackdown, shaming, ignoring, you name it, I smothered him with even more love and codependent behaviors. I was so terrified of my own unmet needs and broken heart. Understand, I know I am not responsible for his abuse, but I most certainly can say I contributed to the chaos in our home just by being panicked, afraid, and desperate. We are all responsible for our own choices. Within the first 6 weeks of our marriage, I began therapy, which I have been in on and off for decades now. I have sought to understand myself, my wounds, my choices, what was done to me, and how to move forward in faith, grace towards myself, and in holding others responsible for their choices. Oh, and boundaries? What are those? I had to learn about them and begin to incorporate them into my life in my mid-40s. Also, there was another word that I did not recognize. It was the word no. I had absolutely no idea what it meant or how to stand in it and enforce it. I'm still working on that one. The Christian experience that I grew up in was cloaked in silence. We were never to talk about anything regarding our human experience, only about the Bible and God's wrath and justice. Very Old Testament heavy. I needed a gentle, loving God to wrap his love around me. But all I knew was condemnation from him and my parents. It was very confusing. The compassionate Savior that I wanted and needed from the New Testament, well, that's not who I was being introduced to. Now, my parents did not hear about the conflict or abuse in my marriage because their marriage was worse. And they would say, "You've made a covenant in front of God and witnesses. You must stay in the marriage." And I did, dutifully, until he tried to kill me 6 years into the marriage. One night, I thought I would welcome him home from work in a negligee. That didn't go as planned, and that triggered him into hanging me up by my neck against the kitchen wall and saying, "I'm gonna effing kill you, bitch." Boom. My life would never, ever be the same. I didn't know what to do. I don't know what made him stop, but he did, and he dropped me, and then he stormed off in a violent rage, swearing and yelling. I fled into the bedroom with the dog, slamming the door, waiting until I heard him charge out of the house and drive away. I phoned my parents and begged them to please let me come home. They didn't want me. They were confused. I had never told them what was happening in the marriage. I was keeping the secret. I was keeping his secret. Keeping up appearances. They were happy with their heads in the sand. They wanted me to stay and work it out. Their marriage had been a sham, and my forthrightness made them very uncomfortable. It made them have to consider their choices. They didn't like that, so it was easier to tell me to just go back. One night, my father even said, "We don't have feelings, and if we did, we certainly wouldn't talk about them," as he was getting ready to lift his hand to strike me across my face. I stepped back and looked at him and said, "Don't you dare." With my father. So I know where I learned that from, don't I? I don't really remember much in the hours and days that followed after sharing with them what I had been living through. Throughout the next 6 months, my parents advised me to return to the marriage over and over again. I continued therapy, and of course, all of a sudden, my husband decided that he needed therapy. Once he realized that I could, would, and did leave, that I wasn't just saying the words. He finally went for therapy. He got on meds for his mental health. He started light therapy, and he began begging me to return, telling me he was a changed man and that he adored me and he wanted a second chance to finally be who he had promised to be in the first place. And so, after 6 months of non-stop begging, I fell for it. And I will admit to this day, that was the worst decision of my life. I ought not to ever have gone back. But I did. We had a vow renewal ceremony, and he was a changed man for about 12 months. It was exactly how I hoped our marriage would be from the start. Even going to church together. And then a baby arrived, a total miracle, as we were told we would never have children. This surprise was definitely mind-blowing. That's an understatement. But then the wheel began to turn again. The abuse began again. Slowly, and then ramped up. And 14 years later, and a second child, the marriage finally ended. At first, the divorce appeared peaceful until the evil went underground. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I would find out about a lie that had been planted by my ex into the minds of my children. He maliciously turned them against me to assure that he had won. Evil and abuse shows itself in many forms. And knowing when to call enough is wisdom. I don't despise myself for going back. It was the only thing I knew to do at that point in my life. However, there are innocent victims of this abuse. They are our children. I allowed them to be brought into this world, and I struggle with that. People often say, but yes, even though they saw the abuse and felt it, they also saw you gain strength and independence and then leave. Doesn't help me much now, or them. I seek therapy still for the effects we all still live with. Their father has messed with their minds so profoundly. Our relationships have been decimated. I believe in miracles, and for now, I pray, as I have been for 20 years, for healing in their hearts and their minds. But to undo the damage of their father is something I do not know if it can happen on this side of heaven. You see, throughout our marriage, I worked while he went through university to get both his education and psychology degrees. Yep, that's right. He's a psychologist. He has all the information necessary to work systems and people to his advantage. He is tall, dark, and handsome, with charisma out the yin-yang, and it's sickening to me how he has turned hundreds of people with that power against me, almost an entire town, and yet they do not matter to me, but my children do, as do my grandson and my granddaughter on the way. Mental and psychological abuse are insidious. They leave no discernible physical marks. They silently and slowly seep into your soul and thoughts and poison you against yourself. Self-doubt and self-loathing begin to grow inside of you, and the gaslighting effect makes your mind go off into some very, very dark places. If you're not familiar with the term gaslighting, it's a form of emotional abuse that makes you question your beliefs and perceptions about reality. You lose touch with what you could actually be doing to protect yourself and find healthful choices for your own future. Eventually, all you focus on becomes what can be done for the perpetrator. What are their needs and how you can help them? How you can love him better. What I could do to understand him better. That is crazy making. You cannot make sane out of crazy, and you cannot love someone else into their wholeness. But you can love yourself truly. I believe that one of the greatest things we could do to change our world is to teach true self-love. Mindfulness and mastery of healthy self-esteem. Fostering families to understand the gentle yet firm love of boundaries and parenting. Teaching our children to think critically. To help children speak up against injustice for themselves and for those they see being mistreated, whether in their homes or in the community. One may say, oh, those are such lovely platitudes, but they really truly are the cornerstones of a healthy human experience. Our societies, most especially in North America, preach a lie that one must be in a romantic relationship to be of worth, that you must be married, that someone will come along and make everything all right for you, that a big house and some children will guarantee stability. And that, my friends, is the lie of Disney. So, to bring it down to a personal level, search yourself through journaling, time in nature, creative expression, whatever feeds your soul. If you have figured that out, sink deeply into that. Choose to be majestically original. Strive for joy in and of yourself. For when doing these things, you are less likely to be swayed by someone else who sees your weaknesses and hooks into them and begins to eat away at your soul and self-confidence. How can you protect yourself if you do not know yourself? Some of you listening today may be the spouse who is being discarded by abuse. I say to you, it is not too late to save yourself. You do not have to get free today. You have to find your way in your time, believing that you will know when that time is to make your move. It has taken your whole life to get you to where you are right now. You must unravel the wounds that have brought you to this moment and to begin again. It's truly not too late to begin again. It wasn't until 7 years before the marriage ended that I began the journey of me, to understand how I came to be and why I am the way I am. It was then I could see why I chose whom I chose, and then to see a different way forward. Even from the day I knew the marriage was over, it took a year and a half for it to actually end. I had to plan my exit strategy and emotionally prepare myself as best I could. I didn't know the trials I would have to face, but I had to begin somewhere. The journey has often been tragic, empowering, terrifying, freeing, and it has drawn me in a closer faith to God. There is no quick fix for the damage from domestic violence and abuse and family destruction. The most loving thing I can do every day is to remember that all that really matters is to be free from hate and to always choose love. Always only love. For myself and my children and even my ex. He has enough trauma and drama that he needs to heal. The last thing he needs is my wrath. I will pass that to my higher power to see justice be done. My justice is to live a life of love and emotional wellness for myself and my children and my grandchildren. Always praying healing can take place. I believe in miracles. I really do. I'm still alive and filled with hope. That alone is a miracle.